Well, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said Iran will pay after it launched an estimated 180 missiles at Israel yesterday evening. Israel says it intercepted many of the missiles, and officials in Washington say US naval destroyers assisted in Israel's defense. Tehran claims most of its missiles hit their targets. Officials in the occupied West Bank said a Palestinian man was killed by falling rocket fragments, and there were several reports of injuries and damage to buildings. Meanwhile, a former Israeli Prime Minister, Naftali Bennet, posted on X yesterday, "We must act now to destroy Iran's nuclear program, its central energy facilities, and to fatally cripple this terrorist regime." Well, let's look at this with David Albright. He's president and founder of the Institute for Science and International Security in Washington. Welcome to DW. Do you think it makes sense for Israel to attack Iran's nuclear infrastructure now?
Oh, that's a question that's very difficult to answer. It's certainly the situation that Iran's deterrent against Israel has more or less collapsed in the last several days. And so in that sense, Iran would be more motivated to build nuclear weapons in order to reestablish sort of the ultimate deterrent. At the same time, Israel probably sees Iran as more vulnerable to being attacked, that it really can't respond. And so we're in a sort of a dangerous window where Iran is incentivized to get nuclear weapons. Israel is incentivized to attack the nuclear sites to prevent Iran from doing that, at least in any near term. So I think it does make sense for Iran to move toward building nuclear weapons, and it makes just as much sense, and it perhaps is more urgent, for Israel to think it should attack the sites and prevent Iran from being able to successfully build nuclear weapons.
I appreciate we are speculating, but
yes,
if
definitely.
Israel were to undertake an attack on Iran's nuclear infrastructure, do you think it would do that alone, or would it look to the US for assistance?
I think it would certainly expect the US to help, and the US would be under tremendous pressure to do so. And whether it would do so by participating directly in launching attacks, I'm very skeptical. The U.S. certainly, my government does not want to get involved in a direct attack on Iran, but it could certainly be dragged into it. And I think Israel would expect the United States to support its effort through intelligence methods, rearmament, perhaps other means too, but to be providing indirect support. So I think it's. I would think Israel thinks it could actually conduct this strike, and the U.S. would be unhappy, but would be offering indirect support.
Explain that to me, because I keep hearing this. I keep hearing about the idea that America does not want to be dragged into a wider conflict in the Middle East. How would Israel drag the world's only remaining superpower into a war against its will?
Well, let me against its will is too strong. It doesn't want. I don't think the Biden administration wants to engage in a war a couple months, a couple weeks, just weeks from a presidential election. It doesn't want to see a whole war, the war escalate. If Israel attacks Iran's nuclear sites, Iran may retaliate in many ways. It could even start launching terrorist strikes around the region, the world. So I think the United States does not, the Biden administration does not want to see a war develop, and it worries that an Israeli strike on Iran's nuclear facilities could precipitate a wider war. So now, if Israel goes ahead and strikes, Israel is a very close ally. I mean, one of our closest allies. Israeli military is fully integrated into our military command, CENTCOM. We provide a lot of their weapons. We provide intelligence. I mean, the United States played an important role last night in helping knock down these Iranian missiles. So I think it is such a close ally that we would be drawn in to help Israel. In the same way, if Russia attacks a European country, I don't think we want to go to war with Russia, but we are bound to step in and side with the Europeans against Russia. And so I think that's the way to think of our relationship with Israel. It's not as formalized like through NATO, but it's still a very strong relationship. And that we're not going to leave our allies, close allies, hanging in the wind, even if they do something we don't particularly want them to do.
Thanks for talking us through that, David. David Albright from the Institute for Science and International Security.
Well, thank you. Take care.
Barbara Slavin is a distinguished fellow at the Stimson Center in Washington, D.C. and a lecturer at George Washington University. And she joins us now for more on this story. Welcome to DW, Barbara. Thank you so much for your time today. All eyes are on Israel's response to this Iranian missile attack on Israeli cities. What considerations are Israeli military and political leaders likely to be weighing right now in choosing a response?
I think this is a very, very worrisome time for everyone in the region. Obviously, the Israelis are now consulting with the United States, at least I hope they are, about the nature of their response. There is a lot of loose talk about Israel hitting Iran's oil facilities or hitting Iran's nuclear facilities. I think the latter would be a tremendous mistake. In fact, at the Stimson Center, we had a former head of Central Command not long ago say that the one thing that would convince Iran to develop nuclear weapons would be an attack on Iran's nuclear installations. So we will see. Back in April, there was a largely symbolic Israeli response to Iranian attacks. This time, I think it will be stronger. But there are other measures. There are economic sanctions, new efforts to limit Iran's oil exports, perhaps. Israel is now going into a couple of days for the new year. Perhaps there will be time for cooler heads to prevail.
You described the idea of Israel targeting Iran's nuclear facilities as a tremendous mistake. How close would you say that Iran is to building a nuclear weapon right now?
Well, Iran has sufficient fissile material to build several nuclear weapons. It could enrich to weapons grade in a matter of days. The question is, does Iran have the rest of the pieces to put together a bomb? That would take a little longer. My concern is that if the Israelis were to hit known Iranian nuclear facilities, the Iranians would use other undeclared facilities to enrich uranium to weapons grade. We have not had proper surveillance of the Iranian nuclear program for several years. This as a result of the Trump administration's decision to quit the Iran nuclear deal and the failure of the Biden administration and Iran to revive that deal early on. So I'm very worried about covert enrichment and a covert program that would lead Iran to say, okay, the only thing that will deter further Israeli attacks is a nuclear weapon.
Can you tell us about the pressures that the Iranian leadership is facing at this moment?
Yes, I was frankly surprised that they sent those missiles. I thought they would hold off. But I think if you heard the remarks of the Iranian president, Pezeshkian, he said that Iran had refrained from responding when the political leader of Hamas was assassinated in Tehran on the day of that president's inauguration. They had held off because the United States had told them, other Western powers had told them that there was going to be a ceasefire in Gaza if they would just hold off. Well, that was back in July, and here we are now in October. There is still no ceasefire in Gaza. And because of that, this escalation has continued. Hezbollah continued to fire rockets. Now we saw the Israeli assassination of Nasrallah, the the assassination of many, many top Hezbollah commanders, and the extension of the war into Lebanon by Israeli forces again. So, had we been able to get that ceasefire, this all could have been avoided.
Avi Melamed is an Israeli author and independent strategic intelligence analyst specializing in the Arab and Muslim world and its impact on Israel. I spoke to him earlier, and I started by asking him how he and his family in Israel are after the attack by Iran last night.
Good morning, Anya. Thank you so much. They are well and fine, including my cat. That was, of course, a little bit panicked, but they are fine. Thank you.
That's good to hear. All eyes, of course, are now on how Israel will respond to the Iranian attack. What do you think that response is likely to be? And if I can ask, do you believe that that will make your family safer, that response?
Well, my family is, however, not safer because the Iranians and their proxies have been attacking Israel, not from yesterday. They are attacking Israel for the last 40 years. As for the Israeli response, I do anticipate a significant Israel response. I think that it will be clearly coordinated with the United States. The whole issue here is to find the right balance between a response that will send a very clear message across the region, on the one hand, and a response that will not necessarily generate a further escalation. I would expect Israel to hit hard in different areas of Iran, basically targeting in a pinpoint manner, differently from the Iranians, who have been indiscriminately sending hundreds of ballistic missiles on cities. Israel will clearly pinpoint attack targets in Iran, very clear military affiliated or governmental affiliated targets in Iran, including, I think, some strategic infrastructure, and that will send a clear, strong message to the Iranian regime that the level of further retaliation, should the regime decide to continue its attack, might be even much more severe.
So you're talking about the Israeli response hitting hard. Following whatever Israeli response comes, do you then see any path for de-escalation, or do you see this as Israel's fight to the finish with Iran and with its proxies?
Look, Israel is in a situation where it's now fighting for its life. And in that situation, you need to be very robust and send a very clear message to whoever wants to threat you. And I think that Israel said it very clearly. They are going to retaliate, and they are going to retaliate hard. And the purpose of all that is, in the end of the day, to make clear in our neighborhood, the Middle East, that anyone that think about eliminating Israel is going to pay a very significant price, to the point it's going to be eliminated. We see right now what Israel is doing to Hezbollah and Hamas, two major branches of the Iranians. And the Mullah regime in Tehran, who is trying desperately to restore its declining deterrence image, basically launched this attack. But in the end of the day, the outcome could be totally counterproductive as far as the Mullah regime is concerned.
Can I ask you, I mean, you're an intelligence analyst. Do you think Iran is close to developing a nuclear weapon?
Well, according to the reports, the Iranians are definitely on the trajectory. I cannot tell you exactly in terms of time frame, but these are the estimations. And also it depends how do you look at the components of this whole project, sort of speaking. But definitely there is a consensus wall to wall among experts that the Iranians are continuing on that trajectory. So this is yet one other challenge that we have to take into consideration when we are talking about that regime.
So in a few years, the missiles that were fired at Israel might have nuclear warheads on them?
Look, I mean, I don't think that we need to contemplate those scenarios. I think that we basically have to take the lessons from up until now and implement the lessons. And the lesson is very simple. Look, we have reached to this point, first and foremost, because of the rapprochement policy of Western powers vis-a-vis the Mullah regime. All those years, the Western governments basically, though they understand how severely dangerous is that regime, they basically chose to kick this can down the road. But if you don't deal with bully when it's little, you are going to deal with the bully when it's bigger. This is exactly what we see right now. And so I think and hope that this is, in this very pivotal moment, in the context of the region, but not only in the context of the region. I do hope that the next thing that will happen is that Western government will gain their senses and basically draw the lessons that they had to draw. So we will not even have to start contemplating about situation where possibly the mullah regime sometime in the future will have nuclear weapons.
On that note, how can the states of Israel and Iran coexist peacefully?
The state of Israel and the Iranian people doesn't have a problem. The problem is the mullah regime. This is a brutal regime. This is a very aggressive and dangerous regime, a regime that is brutalizing its own people, a regime that is responsible for the death and misery and destruction across the Middle East for years and years. The issue is not the Iranian people. The issue is the mullah regime in Tehran. That regime has to be significantly restrained to the point, even hopefully it will be eliminated, because we see very clearly day in, day out, the enormous damage and threat that this regime presents, not only to its people, not only to the region, not only to the state of Israel, but also to the world. And it has to be addressed forcefully.
Avi Melamed, strategic intelligence analyst. Avi, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Of course, thank you for having me. Have a good day.